All right, we have a treat. We have a treat. Especially we can tell by his Noah's Ark tie. Around Aspen, if you're wearing a tie, you must be a speaker. I want to welcome Rabbi Dr. Natan Slifkin and his wife and his eldest son here. Rabbi Dr. Natan Slifkin is the founder and director of the Biblical Museum of Natural History. He received his rabbinical ordination from Or Samayach institutions, graduated from the Lander Institute in Jerusalem with a master's in Jewish thought and law, and received a doctorate in Jewish history at Bar Ilan University with his dissertation on rabbinic encounters with zoology. He's had a lifelong fascination with the animal kingdom and has kept many dozens of exotic treasures. He's published numerous books on different themes relating to Judaism and the natural sciences, including The Challenge of Creation and the Torah Encyclopedia of the Animal Kingdom. Over the last 20 years, he's run a number of educational programs at zoos and natural history museums worldwide, and he's a popular scholar in residence at synagogues, as you can well imagine. He also leads African safaris, I might add, kosher African safaris. So if that tickles your fancies, you might want to sign up. And he was featured on Animal Planet's documentary, Beasts of the Bible. His work has been featured in the New York Times, which some of us read, the Jerusalem Post, and numerous magazines, televisions, and radio shows. Will you please welcome Rabbi Dr. Natan Slifkin.
Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to be here in Aspen. What a beautiful place. Wow. I'm sure you've heard that many times, but really beautiful. My family really enjoying being here. So my whole life I've been fascinated by animals. My parents took me to the zoo when I was 5, picked me up when I was 12. Ever since then, I've been keeping all kinds of weird and wonderful creatures. And about, when I was a kid, people said to me, what do you want to do when you grow up? So I want to have a zoo. And people laughed at me, running a zoo, not a realistic, not a good job for a nice Jewish boy from England. They said I should be a computer programmer. Fine. And then after high school, I went to yeshiva and I decided I wanted to become a rabbi. Oh, that was even worse than being a zoo director. Definitely not a job for a nice Jewish boy. But then one day I thought to look into, what does Judaism have to say about the animal kingdom? And I found this incredible wealth of material, this untapped niche. And I spent many years studying it, writing about it, teaching about it, and eventually opening up the Biblical Museum of Natural History, which I opened 10 years ago. So, before I progress to the main part of the talk, we just want to show a little video about the museum to give you a taste of what we're talking about here. Thank you. Okay, so that's what the museum deals with, the animal world and Judaism, which encompasses many different ideas. It's drawing inspiration from the beauty and wonder of the natural world. It's learning about laws that relate to the animal kingdom, the dietary laws, laws of shofars, and it's identifying animals in the Bible and looking at their symbolism, what we can learn from them, and so on. And what's very interesting is that many of the animals of the Bible have been misidentified. For example, the king of birds in the Bible is the Nesher. Right? It says that God brought us out of Egypt, poetically speaking, on the wings of the Nesher. Now, what's a Nesher? Usually translated as an eagle, king of birds, right? The eagle. But it can't be, because there are verses in the Bible that speak about the Nesher being bald. Are eagles bald? No, they're not. Even bald eagles, right? Lovely head of hair. Wish I had as much hair as a bald eagle. They just have white feathers in their head. They were originally called baldy-headed eagles, B-A-L-D-E. Old English word meaning white, white-headed eagles. But they're not bald, right? Plus, there are verses which describe the Nesher as feeding on carrion, on dead animals, right? Eagles usually take live prey. So which bird is bald and feeds on carrion? The griffin vulture. Right? The griffin vulture, that is the bird that's bald, it feeds on carrion, and it's the lord of the air, it's the king of birds. Right? It's held the altitude record for the birds at 37,000 feet. By the way, there's a story of the griffin vulture who was getting too old to fly south for winter. So he decided to go by plane. So he took some dead antelope as food for the journey. And as he's checking in at the airport, they look at these dead antelope and they say, "Sir, are you checking these in as baggage?" He says, "No, it's carry-on." But seriously, folks, so the Nesher is in fact, not the griffin vulture. So not the eagle, it is the griffin vulture. And then there's other animals that have been misidentified also. The tzvi, right? The tzvi, often a Hebrew name for men, right? What is a tzvi? Anyone know? Often if a person's first name is tzvi, the middle name will be Hirsch, right? And now often, middle names are often a Yiddish translation of the first name. So you have Aryeh Leib, right? Aryeh is a lion, right? And you have Leib, you have Dov bear, and you have Tzvi Hirsch. So what's Hirsch, Yiddish or German for? Deer. Right, so tzvi normally translated as a deer. But it can't be, because the Talmud describes that tzvi as an animal whose horns are not branched. Now deer, as you see from the elk around here, they do have branched horns. So tzvi does not have branched horns. So what is it? It is in fact a gazelle. Right, so you have various animals from the Bible that have been misidentified. And that's one of the things we do at the museum, is to explain the correct identity of them. And we'll talk about the significance of that a little later. Now again, one of the other things we're teaching about is the symbolism of different animals. For example, bears. I see that bears are a big thing in Aspen, and bears are mentioned in the Bible a lot. In fact, when the Bible wants to speak about the most dangerous animal of all, it doesn't speak about a lion or a leopard, it speaks about a bear. Specifically a mother bear bereft of her cubs. Most dangerous animal. Now, why are mother bears so dangerous? So first we have to clarify what bear we're speaking about. Right? There's different types of bears, right? There's brown bears and there's black bears, right? I think you only have black bears here, right? And they're not too dangerous, right? They just eat nuts and berries. But the brown bears, they kill and eat people, so you've got to be careful about the brown bears. And the way you should defend yourself against them, well, for black bears you don't have to worry, they just eat nuts and berries. But for brown bears that can eat people, you should have bells in your clothing, so they can hear the bells and carry pepper spray. But really you want to look for what kind of bear country you're in. And for that you're going to look for their droppings. The way you can tell them apart is that black bear droppings have got little nuts and berries in, and brown bear droppings have got bells in and smell of pepper. Now, but seriously folks, so the bears that lived in Israel were brown bears. Right? And brown bears are very big, like much, much bigger than black bears. They can weigh over 1,000 pounds. So this 1,000-pound brown bear, how much did he weigh when he was born?
30
Ounces. Ounces, yes, it is the greatest size difference of adult to young of any mammal outside of the marsupials. So because the babies are born so helpless, right, the mother bear has to invest tremendous effort into raising and weaning her young. Right, so therefore she puts putting so much into them that she forges a very strong bond with them, and that's why she becomes so aggressive if her young are taken away from her. All right, so this tremendous anger of the mother bear that's spoken about in the Bible is the result of the much greater investment that she has made into her young. And then we have things like the lion. Right? Now, what character trait does the lion embody in Judaism, in the Bible? Anyone know? What character trait, personality trait? Courage? No, that's the Wizard of Oz. Right? In the Bible, it's power. Right? Power and strength. It's also the symbol of royalty and the symbol of Jerusalem. Now, why does the lion symbolize strength? Well, a big, strong animal. But then in the Mishnah, the rabbinic teachings, it tells us that we should be as strong as a lion to serve God. So what does that mean? Lift weights, build muscles? So I think it's alluding to a very unusual aspect of lions. Can anyone tell me, what is the technical term for a group of lions? A pride, excellent. What is the technical term for a group of tigers? A disaster. Right? You can't have a group of tigers, they'll kill each other. See, big cats are all carnivores. It means they're aggressive by nature. It means they can't even get along well with each other. So all the big cats, tigers, leopards, jaguars, lynxes, cougars, they all live alone. Only the lion is able to control its aggression and live in large family groups. And together, these large family groups, they hunt their prey. And that's how the saying goes, the family that prays together stays together. Right, so the Mishnah tells us elsewhere, Ezehu Gibor, who is powerful, Hakovish is Yitzro, the one that controls his inclination. But the real strength of the lion is not its raw physical strength, it's its self-control, its ability to control itself in the presence of other lions. So, these are the kinds of things and topics we're talking about at the museum. Now, last year I started looking up another biblical creature, the Tanin. Tanin is an interesting word in the Bible. It doesn't always have the same meaning. Sometimes it refers to a snake, sometimes it refers to a whale, and sometimes it refers to a crocodile. Right? The prophet Ezekiel, right, he refers to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, as the great Tanin in the river Nile. Right? Symbolically representing Pharaoh, king of Egypt, as the Nile crocodile, right, the top predator in Egypt. So and crocodiles lived in Israel till very recently, right? Till the early 20th century, there were wild crocodiles living in the land of Israel. Right? Now, you see, a lot of people don't realize this. All these animals that are mentioned in the Bible, right? The lions, the bears, the leopards, the cheetahs, ostriches, crocodiles, they all lived in the land of Israel. Now, so I was doing some research on crocodiles, and I came across an academic paper on crocodiles, which is soon to be published as a book, and it was about the Palestine crocodile. And, one second, I've never heard of a Palestine crocodile. I mean, I know there's Australian saltwater crocodiles, there's the Siamese crocodile, but I've never heard of, there's the Nile crocodile, I've never heard of a Palestine crocodile. You know what species? There's no such species. So I started reading this article by one Elizabeth Bentley, New York University, and she starts by saying that the species of crocodile she's talking about is the Nile crocodile, but she's calling it the Palestine crocodile because it symbolizes the story of Palestine and the Palestinians, which for her is a story of settler colonial oppression. Okay, what's that got to do with crocodiles? So she has two ways in which she sees the story of crocodiles in the land of Israel as symbolizing the settler colonial oppression of Palestinians. One is that if you look at information about crocodiles in zoos in Israel, it speaks about how crocodiles lived in the land of Israel till the early 20th century, right? And then they were hunted to extinction by a certain Arab tribe called the Goana. They lived near Caesarea. Have you been to Caesarea? Lovely city in Israel. And near it there's a valley which is known now as Nachal Taninim, Crocodile Valley. And at the beginning of the 20th century, the last crocodiles that lived there were hunted by the Goana, right? It's Arab people that lived there. And Elizabeth Bentley says she's very angry with this description, which you'll see in signs, the crocodile enclosure at the Jerusalem Zoo. She said because okay, technically speaking, the Goanna hunted the last crocodiles, but why did they? Because they were being hired to do so by the colonialists, by which she's speaking about in that context the British. Right, the British wanted to collect zoological specimens, right, so they hired the Goanna to hunt the last few crocodiles for them. So she says, you're trying to pin the blame on the indigenous Palestinians, whereas really it was the settler colonials who were responsible for the extinction of the crocodile in Palestine. And then she goes on to say that there was a double crime, because then the Goanna themselves were dispossessed from the region. They were kicked out of the region, and there's another example, and now she's talking about by the Zionists. Right? She's speaking about Zionist settler colonial crimes against the Goanna who were evicted from their homes in this area around where the crocodiles used to live. Now, I read this article, and it was just wrong in so many counts. So let's first talk about the extinction of the crocodile. Yes, it is technically true that although the last crocodiles were hunted by the Goanna, they were paid to do so by the British. But why did they hire the Goanna to do it? They didn't hire, people from the old Yishuv. They didn't hire, Rabbi Cook to go and hunt the last crocodiles. Why did they hire the Goanna? Because the Goanna were good at hunting crocodiles, right? They were crocodile hunters. Now, I'm not blaming them for that. They had a very good reason for hunting crocodiles. What was their reason for hunting crocodiles? It wasn't to make boots, right? What was it for? Food. No! It wasn't for food. Skin. No.
They were aggressive, they were killing their animals.
For survival! There's no such thing as human coexistence with crocodiles, right? You can coexist, there's human coexistence like bears, right? You've got bears in Aspen. You can coexist with them, right? There's human coexistence with lions. Right? You can go walking around in Africa. You're not going to be attacked by a lion. Lions have learned how to coexist with people and not to kill them. Humans can coexist with alligators. In Florida, alligators are not very aggressive. And what do they eat? Alligators eat turtles. That's why they have these wide mouths to crush turtles. Alligators eat turtles. What do crocodiles eat? Large, warm-blooded mammals. Right? Goats, sheep, people. Right? So there was no such thing as human coexistence with crocodiles. Right? So the Goanna were protecting their goats and their own lives by killing the crocodiles. And that's why there were hardly any crocodiles left. Why were there hardly any crocodiles left at the beginning of the 20th century? Because the Goanna had been steadily hunting them. So even if the British had not hired the Goanna to find the last 3 or 4 crocodiles, the crocodile population was doomed. Right? Because crocodiles and humans do not coexist in a small area. It just cannot happen. So you can't blame, the colonials for that. It's technically the Goanna did. The Goanna were responsible for extinction of the crocodiles, and we're not going to be angry at the Goanna because they had to survive. Now, when it comes to the Goanna themselves being evicted from that area, this time by the Jews, right? By the newly formed Zionist government when the state of Israel came into existence, right? It was actually slightly before that also. Why were they pushed out? Because what was this whole environment where the crocodiles were? Israel today is quite a dry, arid place. But where the crocodiles were, near the city of Caesarea, right, it was swamp. Right, it was all swamp. And what did they want to do with the swamp? Drain it. Why? Not for building. That wasn't the main reason for draining the swamps. Because of malaria. Right, malaria, it's a terrible thing. Right, it was killing a huge number of people, Jews and Arab alike. Right, in fact, if you look, the Arab population in the land of Israel increased dramatically in the early 20th century. Right, why? So it's hard to track down exactly why. Right, certainly there were some people who moved in from neighboring countries for economic opportunities, but also the quality of life. Right, the life expectancy, rose tremendously, and one of the reasons was that what the Zionist movement did was eradicate malaria by draining the swamps. So again, this is just something that happens as human society develops. Right, draining swamps of malaria. It's not some evil, act of oppression against the natives. It's just removing it. The goal is to remove a deadly sickness. Now, what's interesting, I was looking into it even more. What I discovered is that the Guana themselves were very unique in that they had a very, very high natural resistance to malaria. Right? Most Palestinian Arabs did not, and they were, suffering a very high mortality from it. But the Guana had a high resistance. Now, why did they have this high resistance? So I looked into it. But why? Why did the Guana in particular? They were African. They came over from Africa, escaping persecution in Africa, about a century or two earlier. I mean, you look at the pictures, right? They're black. So this whole essay by Elizabeth Bentley, she's going on and on about how the Zionist settler colonials, drove out the indigenous Palestinians. But why are the Guana any more indigenous than the Jews? Right? The Guana came to the land of Israel about a century or two ago, fleeing persecution in Africa. And the Jews came a little bit later, fleeing persecution in Europe. So what's a cutoff point at which you say, up until the 20th century, if you move there, you're indigenous, and after if you move there, you're not indigenous? Right? There's no difference. Plus the Jews were returning to their ancestral homeland. Right? They were, not like the Guana, the Jews actually, our legacy, our history is in the land of Israel. So this distinction between how the Guana are indigenous and the Jews and settler colonials makes no sense. Right? So I wrote all this up, I wrote it and sent it to, I thought before I publish it, I'll send it to Elizabeth Bentley. So I sent my critique to her, and she wrote back to me. I was floored. She wrote, "Hi, Rabbi Slifkin, it's wonderful to hear from you. I'm a big fan of your books." She was Jewish. She was raised Orthodox. And now she's publishing this article in the Journal of Palestine Studies based in Ramallah. I was blown away, absolutely blown away. She said she's not able to respond to my points, she's too busy, she never got back to me. I tried reaching out to her back after October 7th, just wondering if she'd changed her mind. Disappeared. She has disappeared. Social media, everything, completely disappeared. I wonder if maybe she's having second thoughts about who she was aligning herself with. She's not the only one. I came across an entire book called Settler Conservation. All about how the wildlife conservation movement in Israel is really deceptive, and it's ultimately about settler colonial violence against Palestinians. Wildlife conservation, specifically attacking the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, who we work very closely with at the museum. And the author of this book, Iris Braverman, professor at the University of Buffalo. Right, so what's her attack at Israel? So first, in many ways, she starts off with reintroductions. Right? There's a lot of wildlife, as we said, that used to live in Israel has become extinct. Right? Lions, bears, leopards, right? Crocodiles, right? And deer. Right? Fallow deer, mentioned many times in the Bible, used to live in the land of Israel, hunted to extinction in the early 20th century. So Israel embarked on an amazing reintroduction project. These type of fallow deer, Mesopotamian fallow deer, it was thought that they were completely extinct, but it was found that in Iran, there were a few left. So this was back in the 1970s. Israel made a deal with the prince of Iran, that he could come and hunt one ibex in Israel, one mountain goat, and Israel would get 2 pairs of fallow deer to try and make a captive, to breed them, release them into the wild. And it was agreed, and then the Iranian Revolution happened. It was complete chaos there. But on the last El Al plane coming out of Tehran, amidst all the chaos there, so they got 4 deer onto this plane. I met this Iranian Jew who'd been on that last flight out of Tehran. He said he couldn't understand what was going on. Imagine this total panic, the last flight evacuating the Jews of Tehran, and they're putting 4 deer on the plane. But these are these very rare Mesopotamian fallow deer, were brought to Israel, very successfully bred, and released into the wild. And now occasionally, my wife just saw one a few weeks ago, you see these very rare Mesopotamian fallow deer wild in Israel. It's one of the shining success stories of conservation in Israel. Now, so you think, what is there possibly to criticize about that? So this Professor Iris Graveman says it's a terrible thing. Why? Because this is an example of settler colonial oppression. Because the traditional indigenous way of life was to hunt them. Right? And then comes the settler colonial Zionists who say it's illegal to hunt them and make them a protected species and trying to recreate this biblical idea and mess with the natural order. The natural order is that the Palestinians are hunting these deer to extinction. And then the settler colonials come and say, no, we're going to change things and we're going to put back this biblical idea and not let anyone, put these deer back in the wild and not let anyone hunt them. Have you ever heard anything so absurd? I mean, here in Colorado, right, you're introducing wolves. Right, I read about that. Now, there may be questions about, are the wolves going to attack people, attack farms, whatever it is, but certainly in principle, the idea of reintroducing animals that were hunted to extinction, right, I think everyone's going to be on board with that. And it's not some distant biblical thing. The deer were living in the land of Israel, for millions of years. Right? They only became extinct in the early 20th century when people got guns and the Bedouin who were very into hunting were much more effective at killing them and at hunting them. Right? So there's nothing ideologically wrong about trying to protect something that was hunted from extinction. It's just part of trying to save wildlife. And then her next chapter is about, is about camels and the oppression that Israel is doing with camels. Because there are Palestinians who graze camels. And in Israel, it's illegal to let camels graze in nature reserves. And in particular, it was a particular problem because there was another animal that Israel successfully reintroduced to the wild, onagers. Onagers were a certain type of wild donkey, which again, Israel found a few in zoos, bred them, released them into wild to a nature reserve, and the camels were scaring them away from the watering holes. So Israel started to be strict about enforcing fines on anyone who let camels graze in the nature reserves. So, as Professor Braveman says, this is an example of oppressing the indigenous Palestinian population, because you're not letting them graze their camels where they want to graze them. But it isn't a nature reserve. Right? It's not about oppressing anyone, it's about trying to save these onagers and let them survive. And the same laws exist in Arab countries. In Arab countries, the exact same laws exist, that you're not allowed to let your camels graze in nature reserves. Because camels, they can scare away other animals, and they're also very destructive in how they graze. They tear out the vegetation, they can totally destroy it, turn it into desert. So it's the same thing in other Arab countries. Why is it a crime when Israel does it? Then she goes on more, that Israel has very strict fines if camels are wandering on roads. And again, it's impinging its violence against the indigenous Palestinians who are used to letting their camels wander freely. But there's a very good reason why there's a big fine against letting your camels wander onto roads. What's the reason? Collision. And why is it much worse if you hit a camel than, say, if you hit a deer? Why? Not just bigger. Taller, exactly. Camels are very high off the ground. I'd imagine the equivalent here is moose, right? It would be much worse to hit a moose than to hit a deer. Because the center of gravity is much higher off the ground. You see pictures of cars hitting camels, they go straight through the windshield. So again, it's nothing to do with oppression, right? It's to do with saving lives. And again, the same laws exist in Arab countries. In Saudi Arabia, which has 1 million camels, there's a law now, they all have to be microchipped. So that if they find camels wandering around, they know who to find. You have to know who the camel belongs to so you can find them. Right, so this is something happening in every country, even in Arab countries. Why is it suddenly this terrible crime when the Jews do it? Right. So she goes on chapter after chapter of these, and you think it's just so absurd, but she's a professor at a university, publishes this book in academic press, and people, again, are just lapping it up. And again, she's Jewish. Right, she's Jewish. Very upsetting, very distressing. So I've been, responding to these and writing rebuttals and so on, getting it out there. But it's not just about defense against these attacks. It's also about when you think about the wildlife of the land of Israel, what you come up with is a very important response to the essential charge. What's the essential charge being leveled against Israel? And part of the war today, right? The year that we're in, it's not just a war in Israel, it's an international attack on Israel. And that war focuses on this idea of settler colonialism. What is that charge? That charge is that Israel, it's a bunch of, Ashkenazi Jews who came over from Europe. It's a bunch of Europeans who came over and oppressed the indigenous people and drove them out and stole their land. Right? That's the international war against Israel. Now, it's wrong in so many levels. Firstly, Jews never came with a plan to drive out Palestinians. If you look at all the writings of the figures who came, they thought the land's big enough, we can share, we'll work it out, we'll get along, we'll figure out a way to share it. The other side declared war and hostilities at every step of the way. Another difference is we didn't come like Europeans colonized other countries just, and saw opportunities. We came because we were desperate to survive, right? Because we were being massacred in the millions in Europe. We had to have somewhere to live. That was why we came. Not to take advantage of anything, but in order to survive. But the other difference, the crucial difference, is that we didn't just pick a place at random. Right? And people were looking at possibilities, right? When in the early 20th century, when people some people foresaw, and they had no idea what the scale of the Holocaust would be. They could never imagine anything on that scale. But they knew that things were going to be bad. Right? And already, in the early 20th century, there were terrible massacres happening in Europe. So Jews were looking at different places: East Africa, Tasmania, right? Lots of different places they were looking at. But in the end, the only place there were many reasons why those other alternatives couldn't work. But one of them was that obviously the only place that would be able to work out, to move millions of people and to make a homeland would be in a place where we actually have a historical claim. And that is the land of Israel, right? The land where we originated. And here's where the wildlife comes in. And this is something that when we speak about in the museum about identifying the animals of the Bible, it's not just a matter of technically getting it right, but there's something very profound going on here. If you look at art stores around Colorado, right, so you'll see Native American art, right? Because every culture, there's many different peoples in the world, many different cultures, right? And every culture has different aspects to it, and animals play a role in every culture. Right? Every culture will tell stories about animals, will sing songs about certain animals, will make art about certain animals, maybe name their children after certain animals, right? So if you look at Native American art, what animals are you see in that art? Huh? Give me some examples of animals you'll see in Native American art. You're going to see pandas?
Buffalo.
Now, what do you see? Buffalo, wolves, right? Bear, right? That's what you'll see. If you look at art from the first peoples in Australia, right? Australian Aboriginals, what animals are part of their culture? Kangaroos, koalas, emus, right? You look at the coat of arms for Australia. What is it? A kangaroo and an emu. South America, this is something we did in the museum this year. We made this huge map of the world, which we're placing cultural artifacts from different parts of the world, showing which animals play a role in those cultures. All right, so South America, we've got this woolly hat, these long things hanging down on the side. What's the hat made of? What kind of wool? Alpaca, exactly, alpaca wool, right? And it has pictures of alpacas on it, because those are the animals that are significant in South American culture. Now, what are the animals that are part of the Jewish cultural heritage? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the gefilte fish. Actually, it's funny. I was in what was that store in last night? Clark's, was it called? Yeah. And they had gefilte fish there. They had an ethnic food section, and they had gefilte fish. Are there people really going there to buy gefilte fish? I don't know. That's not one of our animals of our cultural heritage. It's not chicken soup either. In fact, there are no chickens in the Bible. Why are there no chickens in the Bible? They weren't invented yet. Right, where do chickens come from? They're made in China. Right, the Chinese took a bird called the Asian jungle fowl. Very, very shy bird. I saw it in the jungles of Asia last year. They domesticated it, made it slower, fatter, right, and eventually exported it around the world as the domestic chicken. But that wasn't yet widespread in the biblical period. So what are the animals of the Jewish cultural heritage? Right, it's the animals of the Bible. The lions, the bears, the leopards, the crocodiles, the gazelles. Now, you don't have too many of these in the shtetl in Europe. Right? There were no lions roaming the shtetl, right? There were no leopards in the shtetl. And they're not from Brooklyn either, right? They're not from England, right? Where are these animals from? The land of Israel, right? And you know, we have this. So one of our exhibits in the museum is art from synagogues, right, from centuries in Europe, and trying to, which are illustrating rabbinic teachings about these animals, and they often get them wrong. Right? There was a reference to a gazelle, they'll draw it as a deer. A reference to a leopard, they'll draw it as a tiger. A reference to a griffin vulture, they'll draw it as an eagle. Because they weren't familiar with what these animals looked like. Right? Because why did all these misidentifications of animals happen? Because the Jews were exiled from the land of Israel, you know, and in Europe, you didn't have these animals. So they started substituting their names, transposing the names to different animals. So they lost familiarity with these animals in the flesh, but they were still part of the cultural heritage. Right? So the animals that are part of our cultural heritage are something that demonstrates so strongly our connection to the land of Israel. You know, lions, right? Such a prominent role in Judaism. 150 verses about lions, 200 references in the Talmud. Right? So many Jews called Aryeh. Right? It's full of teaching, all these synagogue illustrations of lions. You won't find other cultures that depict lions, because lions are the king of beasts. Right? For Great Britain, the coat of arms for Great Britain is the lion and the unicorn, neither of which were commonly found in England. Right? But they have, you know, a certain symbolic value for which they're famous worldwide. But in Judaism, lions play such a prominent role because they were part of our daily lives. Right? Because we lived among them until 800 years ago. There were lions roaming wild in Israel. Right? So this is something that shows so clearly, just like when you see Native American art and the buffalo and the bears, and you understand this is, you know, their connection to the land. So too, you look at the animals that have played a role in Jewish heritage, Jewish history, cultural history, and you see that this is something that we were always rooted in the land of Israel. So this is something now, especially at these times when so much of the world is claiming that we have no right to be in the land of Israel, right? It's so important to be able to demonstrate our deep, deep connection to it. So that's one aspect of what the museum is stressing very much this year. Another thing that we've been doing, and at this point I just want to mention she wasn't able to make it, she had an animal emergency, but Dawn is one of our most significant supporters of the museum. We're very, very grateful for the support that she's given us, especially this year. This year, everyone knows what's going on in Israel. And when the war broke out, so we had some staff of the museum that were called up. But meanwhile, we're trying to figure out, you know, what can we do? What can we do to help? So there was massive population displacement in Israel, right, from the south, from the north, hundreds of thousands of people displaced. So one of the first things we did was, with donor support, we offered free admission for evacuees. And the people were very, very appreciative. And one of the things you'll see in our annual report that's downstairs is a picture of this evacuee family in our Hall of Biblical Wildlife. And, you know, we have all this, in the museum, the smaller animals we have as live exhibits, the bigger animals we have as taxidermy. But we don't have it behind glass, it's just open. Right? So, you know, you don't want kids to touch the taxidermy. So we have these like big stuffed animals, stuffed as in not taxidermy, but, you know, like stuffed toys, right, of the animals of the taxidermy that the kids can touch. So we saw this, we took a picture of this evacuee family by the lion, and the kid, one of their kids, has picked up our stuffed toy lion. And you see that the kid is hugging the arm of the lion, hugging it. And we realized that, you know, these kids they're tremendously traumatized. You know, we found another evacuee family came to the museum. They were sitting outside in their car for 25 minutes before they came in. So they came in, my staff asked them, you know, what was the delay? We saw you sitting outside in the car. They said the kid was too afraid to walk 50 yards from the car to the museum. Right, so we saw there's a lot of trauma in Israel. And we see that animals, especially touching animals, right, is something very helpful for children. Right? A lot of the museum is very hands-on, interactive, touching animals, as you saw in the video. And we had someone write to us. They said that they just visited the museum the previous week, the evacuee family and the kids in Zoom school. And the kid was asked, you know, what makes him happy at this time? And draw a picture of things that make him happy, and he drew all the animals in the museum that he touched. So we realized that this aspect is very significant, and this is where the museum can play a particular role, not just in the conceptual, intellectual thing of showing our historical connection to the land of Israel, but also for children in the emotional support. So we started running animal-assisted therapy sessions. We have a therapist training our staff to maximize the therapeutic value of each visit. We're doing increasing the number of tactile things for children, the number of animals, both real and not real, that they can hug, that they can touch. And another program we have a therapist doing is kids working out which animals embody which character traits. And if you can, and helping kids get in touch with their emotions by being able, sometimes it's very difficult to get the kids to acknowledge their emotions, but if they can identify animals expressing them, then it's easier for the kid to identify it in themselves. So these are some of the ways that we've pivoted during the war to helping, and if anyone would like to help us in this effort, it would be very, very much appreciated, because this is something that we're uniquely positioned to do, to put smiles, to not just connect people to the land of Israel in this unique way with our wildlife, but also in a very hands-on way with the actual animals themselves. Any questions? Be about any aspect of animals in Judaism? Yes, sir.
I have a question. Why are there a very restricted amount of animals allowed to be placed on, let's say, a Jewish mound?
Is that true?
That's absolutely true.
I've seen many gravestones in Europe showing bears. I'm not sure why, but
I've
bears.
never seen any with bears. I was told that we did and in Hungary I got an old book on what could be placed as a sort of an icon of one. They said only lions.
That's very interesting, because I had a question about bears, because I saw so many tombstones, gravestones with bears on them, that I was trying to find out why, and I was never able to find an answer. But I've seen bears. I don't know.
Maybe that's another.
Yeah.
Because where we come from in America, they're designing the monuments that people want to put on a dog or a cat or this.
I don't know. Interesting. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
First of all, in your expert opinion, what do you think the second plague in Israel entails?
Okay. The second plague, the 10 plagues. Sephardia. It is frogs. There is a view that it's crocodiles, but it talks about them going into the ovens and everything, and it's frogs. If it was crocodiles, I think there would be more dramatic things to talk about than them going into the ovens and into the beds. It would talk about them eating people.
Multiple frogs.
Yes, multiple frogs. Right, it says it in the singular. The Hebrew says the frog came up. Now, why does it say it in the singular? So everyone knows the view that it was one frog which miraculously turned into millions of frogs. Right, that's what the commentator Rashi says. But what people forget is that he gives that as the midrash, right, as the creative explanation, and he says the simple explanation is that it's a collective noun. That when you have a lot of animals together, the quirk of the Hebrew language is that it's referred to in the singular. Question number 2.
You are the Hebrew lead. You live in Israel.
Yeah.
You have done more research in identifying biblical creatures than anyone else.
Oh, stop.
Why do you not work this?
Oh, Tchelet. Oh, that's a complicated one. Email me and I'll refer you to a blog post where I discuss it. His question was about tzitzit strings are dyed with the blue secretion, Tchelet, from Hexaplex trunculus, a type of marine snail, which we have on exhibit at the museum. But I don't wear it on my tzitzit. It's complicated.
So you maintain that it is.
Oh yes, yes. And we have some lovely live specimens of it on display in the museum. Any other questions? Oh, hello. Okay, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure meeting you.